Do you ever wonder why some people, despite facing the same external conditions, seem to evolve rapidly, physically, mentally, professionally, while others plateau, stall, or regress? It's not luck, it's not talent, it's mindset. But let's get one thing clear. Mindset isn't some fluffy motivational jargon. It's a neurobiological reality. It lives in your brain, wired into your circuits, shaped by your experiences, and, here's the kicker, entirely reprogrammable. When we talk about resetting your mindset, we are not talking about just thinking positively. We're talking about changing the way your brain encodes effort, stress, failure, and reward. That's neuroscience. That's plasticity. That's change. The human brain is built to adapt. You can literally rewire the connections that define who you are, how you respond, and what you believe is possible. And that rewiring doesn't happen through comfort. It happens through deliberate effort, through friction, through choosing to stay aware when your instincts scream for escape. You want to change your life? You don't start with your circumstances, you start with your circuits. When you hit resistance, when you're tired, frustrated, rejected, that's not the signal to quit. That's the signal that your brain is reaching its adaptation threshold. That's the point at which neuroplasticity becomes possible. But only if you stay with it, only if you train yourself not to pull away, because avoidance teaches your brain that fear equals stop. Engagement teaches your brain that discomfort equals growth. Everything you want, clarity, confidence, discipline, resilience, it's already available, but it's locked behind patterns of thinking that were often installed without your consent. Patterns from childhood, from failure, from fear. Resetting your mindset means confronting those patterns. It means becoming your own architect, rewriting the code by stepping straight into the moments that most people avoid. Most people think mindset is just about motivation or having a positive attitude. But from a neuroscience standpoint, that's an oversimplification. Actually, it's inaccurate. What we call mindset is the sum of real physical changes in the brain. Neural circuits, specifically in regions like the prefrontal cortex, basal ganglia, and limbic system, determine how you interpret challenge, how you handle stress, how you regulate emotion, and how you take action. These circuits are sculpted over time by experience, behavior, and attention. Every belief you hold, every habit you perform, every reaction you default to, that's not just who you are. That's how your brain has been wired to operate. And here's the powerful part. Those circuits are not fixed. The adult brain, contrary to old myths, is not hardwired in any permanent way. It's plastic, meaning it can change. You can train your brain to perceive failure differently. You can rewire it to pursue goals under pressure instead of freeze. You can shift your mindset at the biological level, not by willpower alone, but by understanding how to engage with the mechanisms that govern your focus, your motivation, and your response to adversity. So when we talk about resetting your mindset, we're talking about literally interrupting the default patterns that your brain has been running, patterns that may have helped you survive at one point, but now keep you small. And this isn't theory. We've seen it in the lab. You put the brain in the right conditions with the right input, and it rewires, it adapts. You change the circuits, you change the lens through which you see everything, and that changes your life. The key that unlocks all of this, changing patterns, shifting beliefs, transforming behavior, is neuroplasticity. This is not abstract. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to modify its connections based on experience. Every time you repeat a behavior, engage in focused learning, or even shift your internal state under pressure, you're telling your brain this matters. And what matters gets rewired. Now, here's the critical part most people miss. Neuroplasticity is gated. It doesn't happen all the time. It's not on 24/7. The brain doesn't just passively rewire because you wish it would. It changes when certain neurochemical conditions are met. Specifically, when there's a combination of focus, alertness, and sometimes a bit of agitation. That's right, states of strain, challenge, even slight discomfort open the window for plasticity. So when you feel resistance while learning, or when pushing through a habit you're trying to break, that's not a sign to stop. That's the entry point. That's the biological signal that your brain is ready to rewire. If you wait to feel calm, confident, and completely ready before you make a change, you're actually avoiding the very state that makes change possible. Real transformation requires deliberate engagement with the uncomfortable, the unfamiliar, the difficult, because those are the exact conditions that turn on plasticity mechanisms like BDNF, acetylcholine, and dopamine. And once those are engaged, the brain starts to install a new pattern. That's how a new mindset forms. Not from inspiration alone, but from repetition inside the right neural conditions. You learn to lean in, not away. That's how you build a brain that doesn't just think differently, but responds differently under pressure, under stress, in the real world. Discomfort isn't just something to tolerate, it's something to use. From a biological standpoint, discomfort is not random. It's a signal, and it marks the edge of your current capacity. When you encounter something that stretches you, whether it's physical effort, emotional pain, or mental resistance, your brain enters a state of heightened sensitivity. And this state is not a flaw in the system. It is the system. That's how adaptation begins. Think about it. When you lift weights, the muscle doesn't grow during the lift. It grows in response to the stress imposed on it. The exact same thing happens in the brain. When you step into discomfort with intention, when you don't flinch or distract yourself, the brain responds by reinforcing the circuits that allowed you to stay present. That process over time leads to more resilience, more focus, more emotional control. You literally get better at being uncomfortable, and that changes everything. The problem is, we're conditioned to interpret discomfort as danger. We want out fast. We distract, we delay, we talk ourselves down. But if you can learn to reframe that sensation, not as a threat, but as a sign that plasticity is available, you start to respond differently. You learn to associate discomfort with progress. You start saying, this is where the work is, this is where the shift happens. And your brain listens, it updates, it starts forming new default responses. And eventually, the thing that used to feel impossible starts to feel familiar, even necessary. This isn't about masochism, it's about precision. The right dose of stress, the right kind of discomfort applied with awareness, that's what changes your brain. And when your brain changes, your reality follows. So the next time discomfort shows up, don't run, use it. That's where the adaptation lives. Stress and friction are not the enemies we've been taught to avoid. They're data. They're the body's way of saying, this is where the bound. And if you understand how the nervous system works, you realize that pushing against that boundary in a controlled and deliberate way is how you expand it. When you experience stress, especially in the pursuit of a goal or in the face of challenge, your body releases a cascade of neurochemicals. Adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol, these aren't just stress hormones. They are mobilizers. They sharpen your attention, they prepare you for action, and in the right context, they create the ideal internal environment for learning and growth. But here's the catch. It's all about how you interpret and direct that energy. If you see stress as a signal to back off, your brain encodes retreat. If you frame it as readiness, your brain encodes resilience. The real shift happens when you stop trying to eliminate friction and start using it as a feedback loop. Friction tells you where the adaptation is needed. It points to the skill that hasn't been built yet, the mental habit that's still developing, the emotional response that needs rewiring. In other words, friction is your curriculum, and stress is your training signal. When you start seeing it that way, the whole game changes. You stop trying to be comfortable, and you start trying to be capable. That's not motivation. That's neuroscience. You engage with stress deliberately, and the brain responds by building stronger, faster, more efficient circuits. And that's how mindset becomes more than just a word. It becomes a set of biological upgrades that redefine how you perform, how you recover, and how you lead. Every time you avoid something difficult, whether it's a conversation, a task, a confrontation with your own thoughts, you're not just skipping the moment. You're training your brain. You're reinforcing a loop that says, this sensation means stop. This feeling means escape. And the more you repeat that loop, the more automatic it becomes. That's how avoidance becomes encoded, not as a choice, but as a default. What's actually happening under the hood is that your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, flags the situation as unsafe. And when you escape or delay, your brain gets rewarded. Dopamine gets released, not for solving the problem, but for avoiding it. That's incredibly powerful because dopamine reinforces behavior. So without even realizing it, you're teaching your brain to crave the short-term relief that comes from disengagement rather than the long-term reward that comes from persistence. But here's the pivot. You can flip that script. You can interrupt that loop. When you choose, even in small moments, to stay, to lean in when every part of you wants to check out, you're sending a different message to your nervous system. You're saying, this is safe. This is tolerable. I can handle this. And when you do that repeatedly, the amygdala starts to quiet down. The prefrontal cortex, which governs planning, decision-making, and self-control, starts to take the lead. That's a shift in brain dominance. That's the biology of courage. Avoidance shrinks your world. Engagement expands it. And the more you engage consciously, intentionally, the more your brain updates its map of what's possible. That's not just mindset work. That's neuroplasticity in real time. And over time, the things that used to paralyze you start to feel neutral. The brain stops reacting with fear and starts responding with focus. That's the pathway to resilience. It's not magic, it's biology on purpose. Most people wait until they feel confident to take action, but that's not how the system works. In the brain, action precedes belief. It's behavior that drives change, not the other way around. When you act, especially in ways that challenge your previous patterns, your brain gets the signal, something's different here, and that signal initiates the rewiring process. Let's break that down. The circuits in your brain that represent your self-image, your identity, your capabilities, your limits, are formed through repeated experience. If you consistently act uncertain, avoid risk, or hesitate, your brain encodes that as normal. That becomes your default setting. But the moment you take a new action, speaking up, committing to something hard, showing discipline when it's inconvenient, you create a mismatch between the old pattern and the new behavior. And the brain doesn't like mismatch. It wants to reconcile that gap. That's where the magic happens. With repetition, the new behavior starts to override the old circuit. Your identity begins to shift, not because you sat around thinking about it, but because you proved it to your nervous system through action. That's how the striatum, the part of the brain involved in habit formation and identity encoding, begins to update its prediction of who you are. So the truth is, you don't need to wait for the belief to show up. You build the belief by acting in alignment with it before it feels real. You show up as the person you want to become, and over time, the brain adapts to support that identity. This isn't fake it till you make it. It's perform it until it's programmed. And once it's programmed, it feels automatic. That's how transformation gets locked in, not just as motivation, but as your new default setting. The brain doesn't change just because you want it to. It changes when you give it repeated, intentional input. And that repetition, paired with focused attention, is the core mechanism of neuroplasticity. You can think of your brain like a landscape with paths carved into it. The more often you walk one path, the deeper and more automatic it becomes. That's what habits are, well-worn neural circuits. But here's where most people get it wrong. They think they need intensity to change. They wait for motivation, for a breakthrough moment to force a dramatic shift. But the neuroscience is clear. It's not intensity that drives long-term change. It's consistency with intention. You can rewire your brain in small incremental steps if you bring focused awareness to those moments. Every time you deliberately engage in a new behavior, especially when it requires effort, you're telling your brain, this matters. And the brain listens. It releases chemicals like acetylcholine and dopamine that tag that experience as important, which increases the likelihood that the circuit gets reinforced. Repetition without awareness creates habits. Repetition with awareness creates transformation. That's the difference. You can go to the gym on autopilot and stay the same for years, or you can show up fully engaged, tracking your behavior, nudging your limits, and that's when your brain starts to reorganize. You build new neural maps, you reinforce new responses, you construct a new internal architecture. And here's what's powerful. The brain doesn't know the difference between what's real and what's rehearsed if the focus is deep enough. Visualization, deliberate practice, behavioral rehearsal, they all tap into the same neural machinery. So whether it's physical skill, emotional regulation, or thought patterns, the rules are the same. You repeat it, you mean it, and over time, it becomes you. Your identity, the way you see yourself, the way you believe others see you, isn't fixed. It feels fixed because it's familiar, but from a neuroscientific perspective, it's just a reflection of the circuits you've reinforced the most. Every belief about who you are, whether it's I'm disciplined, I'm lazy, I'm confident, I always mess things up, is just a well-rehearsed loop. And because the brain values efficiency, it prefers those familiar loops, even if they're limiting you. Now, here's where it gets practical. Identity is not something you discover. It's something you build. And you build it the same way you build a muscle, through stress, repetition, and recovery. When you consistently take actions that align with a new identity, even if they feel forced at first, you're giving your nervous system a new model to work with. And what we know from the research is that the brain will eventually conform to that new model. The circuits begin to shift, the old wiring weakens, and the new patterns become the new default. This is why change feels awkward at first. It's not because it's wrong, it's because the neurons responsible for the old identity are still firing. But the moment you make a different choice, when you speak with confidence instead of shrinking back, when you follow through instead of procrastinating, you interrupt the loop. That interruption is gold. It's an opportunity window. And if you capitalize on it again and again, you reinforce a new identity, not with words, but with evidence. The brain begins to say, this is who we are now. You're not stuck with who you've been. You're just rehearsing an old version of yourself. And every action you take that contradicts that version is a signal to your biology to upgrade. You don't wait for a new identity to show up. You act it into existence. That's how people transform, not from the outside in, but from the circuits up. Your brain generates thoughts automatically, constant, relentless streams of ideas, beliefs, and judgments that often don't align with who you want to be or what you want to achieve. But here's the catch. You are not your thoughts. You are the observer of those thoughts. And that distinction is everything when it comes to resetting your mindset. Most people live at the mercy of their thoughts, reacting to whatever pops up in their mind without questioning it. If a thought arises like, I can't do this, or this is too hard, it feels like an undeniable truth. But from a neurobiological perspective, those thoughts are just patterns. Generated by your brain, yes, but not necessarily based in reality or aligned with your potential. In fact, many of the thoughts that pop into our heads are remnants of past conditioning or automatic emotional responses. They're not facts, they're just cognitive noise. The key to resetting your mindset is learning to observe these thoughts, not automatically adopt them. This process starts with a practice called metacognition, which is essentially thinking about your thinking. It's the ability to notice when your brain offers a negative thought and say, okay, I see that, but is it true? Is it helpful? And when you do that, you create space between yourself and the thought. That space is critical. In that space, you can choose how to respond. The brain is incredibly malleable. When you observe and reframe your thoughts, you're signaling to your brain that you don't need to react automatically. You can create new, more empowering patterns. This rewires the way the brain handles stress, uncertainty, and failure. Instead of falling into an emotional reaction, you create a new neural pathway, one that allows for calm, clarity, and a measured response. Over time, this process strengthens your ability to separate your identity from your thoughts, making it easier to choose empowering beliefs and behaviors, regardless of the automatic patterns that arise. So remember, your thoughts are not your identity. They're just one piece of your brain's constant narrative. By choosing to observe them, you take the first step toward rewriting that narrative and ultimately reshaping who you are and what you're capable of. Every single change you want to see in your life, whether it's achieving a new goal, overcoming a fear, or improving your performance, begins with an internal shift. It's easy to think that your circumstances need to change before your life can improve, but that's not how the brain works. Your brain is the foundation of everything. Reset your mindset and your reality will follow. Resetting your mindset doesn't just mean thinking differently. It means learning to think in a way that aligns with who you want to be. It means creating neural pathways that lead to resilience, focus, and clarity. It means rewiring your brain to embrace discomfort, to be comfortable with failure, and to engage fully with whatever life throws at you. The more you reinforce these neural pathways through focused practice, the more automatic they become. Eventually, these new responses become your new identity.